My husband left me while I was caring for my mother in her final days. But everything shifted when her will turned me into a millionaire. I'm 35F, married for 8 years, with 2 children. Along with this, I'm also the only daughter of my ailing mother. My mom had been battling kidney problems for years, but in the last 2 to 3 years, her condition deteriorated, and she needed dialysis twice a week. Earlier, she could manage to go on her own, but over the past year, she often needed me to accompany her. As she grew weaker every day, I decided to step in and take on the responsibility. I created a routine for myself to ensure I'd take her to her dialysis appointments. She needed it twice a week, so I fixed Tuesdays and Saturdays. Saturdays were my days off, so that wasn't a concern, but for Tuesdays, I got special permission from my boss to leave work early and make up the time later in the evening. I've worked at my company for nearly a decade, and my boss has always seen me as a hardworking, dependable employee. However, things weren't as smooth at home with my husband, Tom 37M. When he found out that I'd committed to taking my mom for dialysis twice a week, he wasn't happy. He'd never been particularly close to my parents, and while he tolerated me helping out occasionally, he started voicing his displeasure more openly when I took on this consistent role. Tom believed I was wasting my time. He said that no matter what I did, my mom would never truly appreciate it. Here's a bit of context. My mom owned a merchandising business and was quite wealthy. Growing up, she wanted me to take over the family business, but I had different dreams. I was passionate about technology and pursued a degree in software engineering. After I graduated, I started working for a well-known tech company, which upset her. She wanted me to carry on her legacy, but I was determined to carve out my own path. At one point, she even threatened to donate all her wealth to charity if I refused to take over. I stood firm, even telling her I didn't need her money and would build my own wealth. Our relationship grew tense after that. When my dad passed away 5 years ago, my mom was devastated. Losing him left her lonely, and we slowly reconnected. I started visiting her more often, sometimes bringing my kids so she could spend time with her grandchildren. Eventually, she stepped down from her business, handing its management over to a trust. Tom never had a close relationship with my parents, and things worsened after my dad's death. He often avoided visiting them, claiming my mom was too controlling and meddled in our lives. When my mom announced she'd be removing me from her will years ago, Tom was furious. He started openly criticizing her, calling her unfair and selfish. I asked him to stay out of it, explaining that my relationship with my mom was separate from our marriage. But Tom refused, arguing it would impact our future, especially that of our children. I assured my husband Tom that our future and our children's was secure regardless of my mom's wealth, but he refused to understand. When he found out I'd committed to accompanying her to dialysis twice a week, he started creating a fuss. I explained repeatedly that mom had no one else. She'd lost her parents long ago, and although she had an older sister, they lived on opposite ends of the city and her visits were rare. Since dad's passing, mom had become incredibly lonely, and in this condition, I couldn't just abandon her. But Tom refused to see it from my perspective. Lately, he has made my life miserable. Every Saturday, when I was supposed to take mom for her treatment, he'd conveniently come up with plans, hosting a party, deep cleaning the house, taking the kids out, or even trivial errands like a last-minute grocery run. I told him he could plan anything he wanted on Sundays because Saturdays were dedicated to mom. Still, he continued with his plans and then criticized me for being late or missing them. I'd rush to pick mom up, take her to the dialysis center, stay with her, drop her back home, and then race home to face his sarcastic comments and tantrums. Wednesdays were no better. I had promised my boss I'd make up for the hours I missed by working late in the evening after dialysis. But Tom always found a way to disrupt that too. He'd head out to meet his family, reconnect with old friends, or attend random gatherings, conveniently leaving me to handle the kids. This meant juggling work, cooking for the children, feeding the youngest and somehow trying to catch up on my job tasks after an already exhausting day. Mom, noticing my constant rush, suggested that I let the nurse take her instead. She had a full-time nurse and caretaker after all, but I couldn't bear the thought of not being there for her during her final days. The 30-minute drive to the dialysis center used to be a special time for us to chat about the good old days, but with Tom's constant pressure and tantrums, all I could think about was rushing back home. I started overspeeding, taking shortcuts, and overtaking cars just to make it back faster. Even though I barely had time to breathe, I couldn't bring myself to stop helping Mom. It was my duty as her daughter. Update: it's only gotten worse. Tom has doubled down, insisting there's no point in helping Mom since she removed me from her will years ago and gave her wealth to charity. He keeps saying I'm wasting my time and energy on a lost cause. I couldn't understand his logic. Do we only care for our parents if there's something to gain? What about people whose parents don't have wealth? Should they abandon them too? Finally, after months of enduring his constant complaints, I snapped. I pointed out that his parents weren't leaving him anything either, so why did he keep visiting them? That hit a nerve. He completely lost it, screaming that his parents had done far more for him than my selfish, greedy mother ever did for me. Tom always claimed his parents supported him in everything, and often compared them to mine. They're not like your mother, who disowned you for not joining her business, he'd say. My father would never have done that to me. These kinds of arguments became routine in our house, especially on Wednesdays and Saturdays when I returned from taking Mom to her dialysis appointments. At first, Tom only argued with me in private, but as time went on, he started yelling in front of our kids. Worse, I caught him bad-mouthing my mother to them, trying to turn them against both me and her. When I confronted him, it escalated into another ugly fight. These fights became so common that on the rare days he didn't pick one, I'd feel a strange sense of anticipation, knowing he'd just lash out even harder the next time. I'd reached a breaking point. I stopped yelling back. I stopped justifying myself. I simply ignored him as though he didn't exist. What else could I do? Abandoning my dying mother to keep the peace wasn't an option. I didn't care that Mom had removed me from her will years ago. She had every right to do so. I'd hurt her deeply by refusing to take over her company. That business was her life's work, and when I rejected it, she handed it over to a trust. I understood her decision. It must have been heartbreaking. Now, with her health failing rapidly, I couldn't bear to rush through my visits anymore. She was so weak that even walking her from the house to the car required careful support. Where I used to ask her to be ready and waiting outside, I now went inside, helped her step by step, and made sure she was settled before we left. She also struggled with shortness of breath, so I walked at her pace and drove carefully to keep her comfortable. I knew Tom would be furious if I was late getting home, but at that point, it didn't matter. No amount of rushing would spare me from his tantrums, so I focused on giving Mom the care and attention she deserved. Yesterday, Tom delivered an ultimatum. You need to choose, either your mother or me. I tried to reason with him, explaining that Mom didn't have much time left. Seeing her condition, it was clear she wouldn't be with us much longer, but his response was so cruel. In that case, make your choice carefully. Someone who will be with you forever, or someone who's going to die soon. I was stunned. His words were heartless. I looked him in the eye and said, Then I choose my mom over someone as selfish and evil as you. He packed his bags and left. I didn't try to stop him. I needed space, and honestly, his absence felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I could breathe. In the days that followed, I managed everything: work, the house, the kids, and caring for Mom. To my surprise, it felt easier without him there. Then, 2 days ago, I received divorce papers. I wasn't shocked. I'd expected it, though not so soon. Still, instead of sadness, I felt relief. I signed the papers immediately and sent them back without a second thought. That's when the phone calls started. Tom was furious, yelling, "How could you just sign them without calling me or trying to fix things?" His mother even called, scolding me, saying, "You should have acted like a proper wife and fought to save your marriage." I couldn't help but laugh. Why would I fight for a man who gave me an ultimatum to abandon my dying mother? He wanted the divorce. I simply gave him what he asked for. And now, I feel free. I didn't argue with him when he left. I simply agreed. But I couldn't resist reminding him that he had even abandoned our children, not wanting anything to do with them. He told me I could keep everything, the house, the assets, and even the children. He wanted none of it. His reasoning? He didn't want the responsibility of raising kids on his own. His mother even chimed in, saying that Tom was too young to handle the baggage of children. I was relieved, honestly. I was more than happy to have my children with me. However, I couldn't help but worry, especially about my younger one. The absence of their father was clearly affecting them, and managing everything on my own while working wasn't easy. But I knew I had to push through. After the divorce, I decided to move in with my mom, taking my kids along. It turned out to be one of the best decisions I could have made. It worked out perfectly for all of us. My mom enjoyed spending time with her grandchildren, and the kids were happy to have their grandma around. My mom had a full-time caregiver, and after talking with the caregiver, I arranged for her to help take care of the kids as well, under mom's supervision. The arrangement worked seamlessly. The feeling of seeing my children laugh and play with mom filled me with joy. Tom didn't expect this outcome. He thought I'd struggle to juggle everything, taking care of the kids, my mother's needs, and work. But I had it all set up, and it was going better than I ever imagined. The divorce had freed me, and I was finally able to live life on my terms. I couldn't help but feel that I had the last laugh. Sadly, a week ago, my mom passed away peacefully in her sleep. She went to bed content after spending the evening playing with my children, and she didn't wake up the next morning. The doctors and nurses said she had been happy in the months leading up to her passing, and that the time spent with us had extended her life. I was grateful that mom got to enjoy those last months, and I'm proud that my children were able to make her final days brighter. While it's incredibly sad to lose my only parent, I take comfort in knowing she imparted valuable lessons to my kids. They've been saying things like, "Grandma taught us how to accept reality and move on." That really strengthened my resolve. My children are my strength in this moment of loss. But then came the most surprising part. After my mother's death, her lawyer reached out, asking me to come to the office to review the will. I didn't think it was necessary. Mom had already told me she'd left everything to a trust, so I figured the lawyer would just be processing the paperwork. I even asked if I needed to move out of mom's house, assuming it was going to the trust as well. But when I got to the lawyer's office, I found the trust members there waiting. As the lawyer began reading the will, I couldn't hold back my tears. To my shock, my mother had left me everything: her business, her house, and all her wealth. I asked the lawyer if this was a recent change, suspecting mom might have made the adjustment after I started taking care of her. The lawyer smiled and said, "You've always been her heir. The will was never changed." I broke down crying. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My mother never truly abandoned me. Maybe she had threatened to disown me at one point, but that was her way of motivating me to take on her business and legacy. It hurt so much to know that I had hurt her in the past, but in the end, she had always cared for me. Despite everything, the lawyer informed me that my mother had been incredibly proud of me for not giving up on my passion, even under the immense pressure from him. He admired that I was willing to let go of generational wealth to pursue what truly made me happy. The lawyer told me that mom had always believed in my ability to lead, and as the decision maker for the business, I had the option to take it back from the trust and run it myself. I'm seriously considering that now. Mom indirectly supported me in my choices, and now it's my turn to honor her legacy. I'm thinking of reclaiming the business from the trust and scaling it to the level she always envisioned. It's time to make it soar. After learning about the will, I sat down with my children to share the news. My mother had left them a portion of her wealth as well, to be given to them when they turn 18. That moment felt incredibly bittersweet. We then went to her grave with flowers and spent some quiet time reflecting. It's such an emotional phase for me, coming to terms with everything and realizing how much she truly loved and believed in me. A month after Mom's passing, I began taking over her business and her other charitable work. I made the decision to quit my job and dive headfirst into running the business. We also decided to move into my parents' house. The kids and I felt a strong connection to this house, filled with my childhood memories. It was important to stay here, to hold on to the past while moving forward. With the inheritance of my mother's wealth, I received a lot of visitors, long-lost relatives, friends, and neighbors. But the most unexpected visitors were my ex-wife and his parents. They arrived at the house, sobbing, saying they didn't know about my mom's passing and would have attended the funeral if they had. His parents went on, saying only good things about my mom. My ex hugged the children and cried, expressing how much he missed them. I asked him, if you missed them so much, why didn't you visit them in the last several months? He said he went to our house, but it was locked. What a lie. I pointed out, weren't you concerned when you saw the house locked? Didn't you think you should check in on them? Didn't you care enough to make sure they were okay? He didn't have an answer. His parents started saying, let's put the past behind us now that your mother is gone. The children need a mother, and when you're at work, they'll be alone in this big house. It would be best if we reconciled. I laughed in their faces. The children needed their mother when she abandoned them. Now, they've adapted to his absence and I have no intention of letting him back into our lives. He started crying, and his parents left the room. He then held my hands and pleaded for reconciliation. He told me he loved me and missed being with the children. I just laughed and said, you don't love me. You love the wealth my mother left me. You and your greedy parents are here at my door just to leech off my money. I don't regret saying that. His parents had called my mother greedy and mean during our divorce, and now they wanted a piece of her hard-earned wealth. There was no way I was going to let him have a penny of what Mom had worked for. He was offended by my words and said that until now, he had been pleading because he loved me. But now, he would take what was rightfully his. He never demanded alimony during the divorce, but now suddenly, he wants half of my wealth, or rather, half of my mother's wealth. I told him he could do whatever he wanted, but there was no way I was giving him a penny. I'd destroy him first. I discussed this possibility with my lawyer. He reassured me that his chances were slim. The divorce had been settled long before I received the inheritance, and since the children were living with me, there was no legal basis for him to claim anything. But he also cautioned me to be careful about letting him spend time with the kids. He could manipulate them, file for custody, and then use them as leverage to demand money for their upkeep. I was incredibly grateful for his advice. I'm going to supervise their meetings closely and ensure I spend a lot of time with the kids during this emotional time, so they don't turn to him for support. I've now taken over my mom's company, which gives me the flexibility to balance my personal life and well-being. I've been able to dedicate more time to the kids, helping them cope with the loss, and I've planned a vacation to the Bahamas for us. They deserve this lavish getaway. It's not about overspending my mom's wealth, it's just that I finally have the time to enjoy it now. I could have afforded it earlier, but I was too busy juggling work and caring for my mom. Now that I'm in charge, I want to make it special for them. As for him, he hasn't contacted me since the last time he showed up. I'm sure he's out knocking on every lawyer's door, trying to find a way to sue me, but he won't succeed. He won't get a single cent of my mother's hard-earned money.